There's a new party drug sweeping Australia. Its use is on the rise, and so are overdoses. All sorts of people are taking it in clubs, bars, and even at home.
We really don't know anything about how many people are using it. We know it is definitely becoming more popular.
The drug is GHB, or gamma-hydroxybutyric acid. It's also known as GBH, or grievous bodily harm, and with good reason.
Well, it's an anaesthetic agent, and so we use it, for example, to put people to sleep. I could take your appendix out by giving you a dose.
Taking GHB is living on the edge. Just a few drops is the difference between a safe dose and an overdose. Every weekend, emergency wards around the country are filling up with patients who've misjudged their dose. Staff and life-saving equipment are being pushed to breaking point. So one doctor in Adelaide is looking for a better way to deal with the crisis. Dr. David Caldecott is the Emergency Research Fellow at Royal Adelaide Hospital. He's seen a disturbing increase in GHB overdoses over the last few years. He says it's a big problem, particularly in Sydney.
And how many cases are we looking at?
Oh, they're looking at 10 a week, easy.
And what's the main problem for an emergency ward dealing with GHB cases?
Well, as you can see here, we are a new emergency department, and we have 4 resuscitation bays. This is one. One of the things that many of the GHB overdoses require is intubation and ventilation. And to do that, we need an endotracheal tube, which is a very simple piece of equipment. It's a simple plastic tube, and we need a ventilator, which will breathe for our patient when they stop breathing, as they often do with GHB overdose. But as you can see, with only 4, if you have multiple overdoses coming, say, for example, from a nightclub or a rave, all of a sudden you run into a lot of trouble ventilating your patients.
This is the frightening possibility that hospitals all around the country are facing. GHB hasn't always been illegal. It was used above board for many years as an anaesthetic in hospitals. So how did a drug that was once used to do good in our hospitals end up creating a crisis? In Sydney, Paul Dillon from the National Drug and Alcohol Research Centre has been tracking GHB and its uses before it was made illegal.
It was really introduced in Australia through the bodybuilding fraternity, who had seen some research that was conducted in Japan which suggested that GHB promoted deep sleep. Deep sleep could actually reduce fat and create muscle, so of course it was particularly attractive to the bodybuilding group.
In the 1990s, GHB started to trickle into the hands of partygoers. That's when people started overdosing, and it was banned in Australia shortly afterwards.
As soon as it was banned, it became extremely popular, which is what we tend to find with these sorts of drugs.
The GHB people are buying now is no longer pharmaceutical grade. It's being made from solvents, and this has made David's problem even worse.
These drugs or chemicals are usually taken from industrial sites and therefore not prepared for human consumption.
GHB is being taken by people like Sarah, who takes it most weekends.
Once it sort of kicks into like a full effect, you get like a bit of blurred vision and you're moving around, you feel a bit off balance, but it just really, it gives you that sort of lowered inhibition where you just feel good and you're just relaxed, yeah.
Sarah always colours her GHB so no one mistakes it for water, and she's careful to measure out exact doses before she takes it.
There's rules that you go by to taking GHB. The effects of it are quite enjoyable when you have it, like, responsibly.
But misjudge your dose by a milliliter and you start feeling the effects of a powerful anaesthetic kicking in.
One time I've had it and I felt like, if I really wanted to, I could probably sit down in a corner and go to sleep.
The breathing will slow to a point where the oxygen levels will drop critically in the blood. the pulse decreases, the blood pressure decreases.
Just a few drops more and sleep becomes a coma.
The brain is effectively starved of oxygen, and on top of that, the muscles which support the airway can go floppy or flaccid, and the commonest cause of death from GHB and GHB-like compounds is respiratory arrest. We had an episode at a bar about 18 months ago where instead of chugging shots of vodka, they decided to chug shots of GHB. And we had 7 simultaneous presentations. And that threw our department into absolute chaos, purely because we had to try to maintain the airways of all of these people at the same time.
The hospital couldn't go on like this for much longer. They had to find another way of treating GHB overdoses that didn't tie up the precious ventilators. David began scouring through old medical journals, hoping that something in the history of GHB might give him a clue. Then he stumbled across an old forgotten paper written almost 30 years ago. In the 1970s, 2 anaesthetists from Dunedin Hospital in New Zealand were using GHB as an anaesthetic, and they were trying to find a way to reverse its effects. They came across an old drug called Physostigmine, which they suspected might do the trick. When they tried it, their patients woke up after a few minutes instead of several hours. But David had a big problem with Physostigmine. Over the years, it had gained a nasty reputation for causing seizures and even death.
So this is Physostigmine. It comes as a solution in a vial.
And it's had a bit of a bad rap itself, though, Physostigmine.
It has, but once again, going back into the medical literature, the foundations of its bad reputation are very shaky indeed. And in fact,
he double-checked the literature, and finally he was sure that the criticisms of Physostigmine were based on flawed research. Then came the moment of truth. He decided to try Physostigmine on GHB overdoses. Were you nervous when you first tried it?
Of course. We didn't know what would happen.
To his great relief, it worked.
Quite how well it worked surprised us tremendously, and that was definitely a grinning moment.
So far, David has administered Physostigmine to GHB overdose patients who are partially awake. 4 out of 5 of these patients have come around without needing to be ventilated. For the Royal Adelaide Hospital, it's a huge leap forward. This new approach won't stop the overdoses, but it could save lives, and it will save precious resources in our already stretched emergency wards.
What would you say to people considering taking GHB?
Try another drug. There are lots of other drugs. I don't advocate drug use, but please, if you have to take a drug, use something else. This is an anaesthetic agent. I'm not a drug Nazi, but if there was to ban anything, it would be GHB and all of its precursors.